We're good. Okay.
Hello.
Good morning. Good morning.
Maybe I can borrow half an earbud for a minute.
Yeah. So, okay. Camille wants to hear.
Oh, there we go. There we go.
We'll share an earbud for a minute before you all converse. Oh, so good to see you. How are you?
Nice to see you. It's been quite a while. Mashallah, I'm doing fine. And, obviously all of us are saddened and affected by what's going on. And I have so many friends who are, affected mostly indirectly, meaning I don't know a lot of people who are in the hospital, for example.
Yeah.
But everyone is affected, of course, by this. How are you?
Alhamdulillah, we're well.
Alhamdulillah.
We seem to be doing fine. And yeah, I've been intending to have this conversation with you since we found out you might not be able to join us at the Mercy Center retreat. And I thought, well, maybe we'll have a conversation on Zoom and we'll share your presence.
Yeah.
And then that event was canceled, and we fled California about 10 days ago. We were in California, and we fled, so to speak, in order to be able to be at home and not get caught, away from home.
Yeah. Alhamdulillah. It was, we were down in the San Diego area for a little bit.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Project there.
And but obviously with everything going on and travel restrictions and such, it is best to maybe be in one's own space and to wait things out and yet stay in touch with people. We're lucky in the information age. We can do Zoom, we can talk, and all of these things, obviously, with our friends. But it is a remarkable situation that has been unfolding, and the consequences just seem to be multiplying as time goes on.
It's amazing how quickly one's reality can shift.
Yes,
and I think that our spiritual journey and practice should prepare us for that, for meeting any reality. And here we are, hopefully remembering the true reality.
Yes, well, that's the interesting thing about sudden shocks, whether they be medical and very personal, or on occasion when, this is a global event that has just, an amazing diversity of reactions. I mean, just on the moving to we might call it the uplifting or positive side, one sees so much sacrifice and cooperation. Even the environment, we see, well, what happens if there's less motor travel and air travel? What happens to the air? And we see, anyway, the way I've thought about this is the great blessing, considering politically where things are at in the world, that a plague, frankly, of milder proportions than those that have happened historically, but just strong enough to cause governments and individuals to think about how important preparation is, and also hopefully how important science is. So just think about our country and our administration. What if a milder virus had come along? Would they have paid any attention to it? And my guess is no, they wouldn't have. Um, would we want anything like what's happening? Of course not. On the other hand, if we think about something that would shock us into rethinking, taking things more seriously, and this is going to happen, I think, organically. You're going to have people who are going to question, I think, especially youth, they're going to be questioning some of the loony ideas that float around in any culture, and that could be any part of the world. And it doesn't necessarily only have to be youth, but I think youth are more young people are more likely to question things. But as I've thought about it, I've thought about the great tarbiyat, the our Lord sends us the level, let's say the training level that we can handle, which is a great blessing because it may not be that way next time.
Yeah.
And so I think of the positive things as well as all of the sadness and watching the immense tragedies, especially in the third world, where you just see in India, like if you look at what's happening in India, some of the most amazing footage I've ever seen is on today's BBC, where you have incredible coverage of the chaos in Delhi, people fleeing by the hundreds of thousands, not because of the coronavirus, but because they're afraid of starvation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the footage is utterly astonishing in this video today on BBC.
Haven't seen that yet. Yes. I know that Modi issued the lockdown announcement at 8 p.m. in the evening, and people had 4 hours to prepare. Yeah. And I had an experience a couple of days ago of experiencing for a little while the grief and sorrow of this situation, and in a way that felt objective and deep and painful and yet true and necessary. And in a way, I'm thankful that I don't have to experience that all the time. I don't know if I could bear it, but to experience a taste of it and to realize what a catastrophe this is for a portion of humanity, even while some of us are almost luxuriating in the stillness and relative peace of not doing so much, not doing all the things we were doing before. And then a portion of the world suffering, and people who are on respirators, who it's been described that it's akin to drowning. The experience is akin to literally drowning in your own fluids.
Yeah.
So it's very serious. And at the same time, as plagues go, it's not cholera, it's not Ebola. One of our friends in Hakan Talu in Istanbul shared a blog yesterday, and he's a historian of Sufi and particularly Mevlevi musical tradition. And he shared about some of the great Nazens who in the 1800s died of cholera, how the cholera spread it started in Hijaz with people coming from India, and it eventually spread to Istanbul. And then in 1865, there was a great fire in Istanbul that destroyed 3,000 homes. And that also took care of the cholera.
Oh,
yeah. So anyway, as you say, this is in perfect measure in some sense. I mean, from a certain point of view, we can see the perfection of the divine plan, giving us what we can handle, what we can hopefully deal with. And many people will question that. They will say, well, why does the divine reality even allow something like this to happen? What good could there possibly be in it? And you remember, of course, the beautiful hadith that says, oh my Lord, protect me from the harm of it, whatever that it may be, but don't deprive me of the good of it.
Yeah.
So the good of it in this case will be the acts of heroic generosity and compassion and the awakening to sincerity that it could mean for any one of us. So here we are, and so grateful to have a way of framing this, a way of perceiving it, where we sense the positive meaning in it, and hopefully if we can remain awake, it may benefit our souls.
Yes, and it certainly, you see, as you say, wherever we look in the world, then in some ways, the more desperate people are in certain parts of the world, the more acts of sacrifice and caring you also see. But even in Europe, when I look at what's happening in Spain, where I've spent a great deal of time, and one of the reasons I follow BBC is because they're very closely covering all the European events, Italy and Spain, particularly difficult. But as you probably know, in the evening, the people come out and they clap from their balconies. And it reminds me so much of the spirit of the Spanish people. For example, when we had the first Gulf War, and you would see these huge banners all over the place in Spain, no a la guerra, no to the war. They had, of course, the leader of Spain at that time was an ally of Bush, and they were not just speaking about the American action in that part of the world in Iraq, but they were protesting their own country getting involved. But when I just think about the spirit of those people, their passion and their emotion, it's very immediate, which has also got them into a great deal of trouble. Because, as you know, when I'm there, and I'm there a lot, I see that they just love to socialize, and they stay up all night and they party and they share drinks and cigarettes, and they kiss, and they hug, and it's just, and it's not a huge surprise, but the people respond, and there, and also in Italy, they have now they're called the Kamikazes, because they are the health workers knowing that most of them are going to get sick, because their health workers are really not protected, say, compared to when you look at Korea and other countries that have had their act together, dealing with this, and you see how well Japan, you see just how suited up people are and how protected they are. And in Spain, you see very little of that. So you have this huge percentage of health workers, and they now have got the name the Kamikazes.
Yes.
And I would call them Kamikazes of mercy, because they go knowingly, that, and a great number of them are not just becoming ill, but they're passing away, they're dying.
Yeah. Did you want to say something?
For the benefit of the recording of this, I should probably give Kabir back his full mechanism, but it's so wonderful to see Bob, and look forward to hearing more of this conversation a bit later.
Yeah. Well, it's so nice to see you, and as always, and I realize it must be about 6 months since we had a meal together at the restaurant. I can't remember when that was, but it was a nice time of the year, as I recall. And we were at that lovely little place, and inshallah, one day again, we will be able to meet up there.
Inshallah, before too long, God willing. Take good care.
We take good care.
Yeah. Well, we're touched personally by this situation. Our son and daughter-in-law are medical people in Portland, Oregon. Our son is a hospitalist who originally wanted to go into infectious diseases. That was his original intention. And he's been aware of this possibility for some years. And so he's now is on the front lines, although the situation in Portland is not yet as drastic as some places. And our daughter-in-law, her name is Star, and she's a nurse, and she's been called to work in a nursing home, although they actually have had her working at a distance, not actually going into the nursing home yet. So it's, it strikes very close to us. And we don't know too many people who have been taken ill. We know of two, and maybe you're aware that Alan Godless, Professor Godless, has tested positive, and I think has come through it well, did not get very sick. And one other friend in London was just, seems to have it as well, and we're waiting to see how he fares. But may we all be protected and
I didn't know about Alan, but I'm so glad to hear that he's pulled out of it. That's wonderful.
Yes.
One of the good things is that it isn't cholera, and therefore, yes, there are many deaths, but there are very many survivors also.
Yes. It's also worth mentioning that Shems Friedlander, who you may know or at least know of, that he had a heart attack in Konya and had a double bypass just, I think, last week.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I hope he's doing well. I don't know otherwise, but yes, may he be protected.
Yeah, we all have these situations, and we're supposed to hunker down and do the social distancing. In my own life, I continue to go to Sausalito about 3 days a week because I have duties there, essential duties, taking care of the boats, pumping them out with the rains, and working a bit with administrative stuff, and working with the occasional student where we do practice social distancing. But the other thing is just sort of getting on board the idea that we don't know. It's so weird not having simple tests. And therefore, there's this interesting psychology of, could I be carrying it?
Yes.
Could they be carrying it? And then I found out a week ago that the manager of the building that we lease, where the school is, that the boatyard manager had a high fever, and I was warned by the trustees of that organization that, this could very well be coronavirus. And I thought, well, I'm glad that I have been taking this seriously enough, meaning to do some of the things, to get used to the idea, using these pads with bleach to, when I come in the morning, to do all the handles, do all of the, you see, in case anybody comes in to see me, it's not just for my own protection, but certainly it is also. So sort of getting into, hopefully, what is not a paranoid, but rather a kind of just careful way of taking care of myself and trying to take care of others. And so now I do this so much that I make my own bleach solution, and I go and I spray everything. I spray, I clean toilet seats down, in the bathroom. I clean because because I'm not sure anyone else would want to do that, first of all, and and I don't want to ask anyone to do that. So I just get
Yes.
in there so early that I go and I do these things,
Mm.
and um, and of course uh, I'm thinking about myself. But what an amazing thing about what's going on is the we're seeing the world in a way that we haven't seen it before. We're seeing our own country, we're seeing our own neighborhoods, and we're we're seeing the stresses also that people go through just by being sort of homebound. So there's the good and there's the bad. There are people who are really suffering from being locked up at home, maybe with somebody who is abusive, either verbally or otherwise. Maybe just something. So some people go stir crazy. We're also seeing. Um, it feels, in addition to the positive things that I mentioned earlier, to me it seems like this is the beginning of possible shift in terms of trust or reliance upon government and governments, because in most cases that we have seen, either it's very authoritarian, like China, where we don't really know what's going on, or North Korea, or it is, in the case of our own country, I see it as sloppy, just very crazy stuff. Like we had this team that was watching viruses for years, and when this administration came in, they said, we don't need this. If we need scientists, we'll get them when we need them. We don't need all these people in this office or that office. And so you see like the utter chaos caused by not having a working government. And I think that no matter who you are, and despite all of the polarity, and say in our own country, I think what does come to light for a lot of people is this was not very well organized, and I think that there might be a change afoot around the world about how people think about organizing, taking care of themselves, communities, or making sure they have more responsible government. As I said earlier, what is the tarbiyat? And the tarbiyat in this case, the taking care of us by teaching us of our Rab, is that, well, uh, you weren't ready for this. You you weren't even vaguely, even slightly ready. Either everybody thought their lives were going to go on as normal, and people had become very attached to things, or the government were just not thinking at all about the people, or thinking too little about people. And here are the new circumstances. So the Tavya just sort of turns everything upside down, and you say, oh, what do we actually have here? What should we do now? And should governments use this for political reasons? Should should um, should people obey? To what extent should they obey? And what's heartening is the compassion of understanding that, well, I might be carrying this myself. Why should I think I might be the victim? What if I'm actually the one who creates victims? You see, so you get maybe a chance to you see people, is what I'm saying. I'm sure this happens to
Yeah.
you as well. You see people coming forward. But I do see a change afoot that's going to be permanent, I think. That's going to be, or very, very durable, I should say.
Yes. And a new dimension of taqwa, isn't it?
Yes.
Of vigilance, of consciousness, of the effects that we have on the world, and a new sense of responsibility for ourselves and a new awareness that all the things we thought we were defending ourselves from were not the threat that appeared and shut down the world economy in a totally unprecedented, I would say, unpredictable way. You know, one couldn't imagine an economic, fall like this, and where everything suddenly just had to stop, and production had to stop, and anything that involved people coming together had to stop. So we shall see where it leads and how humanity is changed, what emerges from it, new businesses, new social organizations, or forms of social organization. And recently, someone shared with me the beautiful notion that the one thing that we have is the possibility of filling our own homes with the light of divine remembrance, that while we are sheltered much of the time, if not all the time, in these abodes that we have, that we can intentionally bring the light of God, the remembrance of God, into these homes, so that there are these sanctuaries of light in the world, somewhat in chaos. And I found that a very beautiful idea, and it sort of pointed me toward possible deepening of our own practice, and particularly how can we deepen our prayer and our remembrance in these times. Do you sense that possibility as well?
Well, yes, I mean, to me, I thought of it in a similar manner that, instant retreat, meaning I always wish I had more time to do certain amount of retreat, more zikr, more translation, more, in particular, just more practice of those practices that are internal. And externally, it's interesting that you mentioned taqwa, because I think that's a really good word, in the sense that it, especially with regard to outside of ourselves, the way that Sheikh al-Akbar links it, he links it to viqayat. So taqwa, the word coming out of that is viqayat, which means a protection. So he uses it in the context of having taqwa with God, and therefore being protected by God, and protecting God from, in his words, from the misunderstanding that people might have of the doctrine of the oneness of being. But he makes the longer point that taqwa comes from the idea of protection, and it means it's a protection. And when we say, وَقِنَا عَذَابَ النَّارِ, after our prayer, it's the same root as taqwa.
Yes.
So the idea that it's a protection. So in a way, the idea of an internal cultivation of taqwa, and taking it out and understanding that it is a taqwa to protect others, to protect oneself, yes, but to protect others. And so that the whole idea of that taqwa is seeing others, the spirit of God in others, and trying to serve others in the spirit of taqwa as protection. With regard to practice, what I did, this is so interesting. I decided to open the Masnavi at random.
I did the same thing today.
Isn't that so funny? And
I haven't for a long time.
I decided I'm going to open it at random, and I thought this is so interesting, and I found a poem and I translated it and I put it on Sufi Garden. You can see it there if you
Mhm.
care to. There I put as the title for it is "What We Thought We Had,"
Mm.
and it's a poem of Rumi's about that really does, not surprisingly, hit on our situation in a number of ways. So what I love. I tend to be solitary and reclusive anyway, and yet I enjoy the teaching I do with my students, the work that I have that's external and largely physical work. But coming back to the idea of the home, like I either do it at home or when I'm at work, I'm actually alone there most of the time because I get
Mm.
there before 6 a.m.
Mm.
And I take the astrolabe. I've been working a lot with the astrolabe, the
Mhm.
medieval astrolabe. I go out and I take sightings of stars, and then I go back and do the calculations for what time it is and
Uh-huh.
other various things that you can calculate. So I do all of these weird things
Mhm.
that that uh, so I have to admit there's a level at which I am appreciating what has happened,
Yes.
for the space, like has created space, is what it has done.
Yes. Well, yes, absolutely. We have a right to that. I think that the divine intends that in a way, and I'm looking for this ayat from Surah Al-Talaq, ayat 4. And for those who have taqwa of Allah, He will make their path easy.
Yeah, there you go.
And it was taqwa protection from the fire. And yes, there is a fire going on,
Yeah,
and may we be protected. And if it is our fate, we accept it and we embrace it, and may we be protected. Um, I too am looking for something that I translated recently. I think this is it. And it's from Mesnavi, of course, book 6, beginning around line 33. And I did this translation 17 years ago at the beginning of the Iraq War, which was in March of 2003.
mhm.
And it seems particularly relevant today. The snakes are scattering venom, and though the sour-faced folks distress us, yet up in the mountains, in hives among the trees, communities of bees still create their stores of honey. As much as the poisoners spread their poisons, these antidotes will neutralize them. When you reflect, the whole world is in conflict, particle with particle, just as spirituality is in conflict with denial. And then he goes on to describe the very nature of this reality that we live in. And this is being at the beginning of book 6, after so much wisdom has been given through the previous 5 books, so much about attaining intimacy with God, closeness to God, and the joy, ecstasy, beauty of that. Then finally in book 6 begins with a description of a world at war, that every particle, the 4 pillars of the elements, water is at odds with fire, and fire is at odds with earth or wood, and so on. And this is an aspect of the reality we live in, and at the same time, it's all mercy. At the heart of
Yeah.
it, it's all mercy for those
That
who have faith.
that poem, I find book 6 very remarkable in this way that he he decides to include this material, and it reminds me, oddly enough, of say the Bhagavad Gita, and I don't know if you've read the Bhagavad Gita very much. I imagine
A
you've
little bit,
read
yes.
it once in your life, because most of us were exposed to it. But what happens in the Bhagavad Gita is later in that book, which is not very long, Lord Krishna reveals himself in his terrible aspect. So this is near the end of the Bhagavad Gita. So prior to that, we slowly find out that Lord Krishna is actually the divine incarnate, or let's call it the voice of God, we might say. And we find out all of the elements as a guide for Arjuna. Arjuna is the archer who is in sorrow because he has to slay his relatives and so forth. And Krishna says, well, you have to do this. This is like a large chess game, so to speak, and it's already been decided. And in fact, I've already decided that all of these people will die because I'm the creator and I'm the destroyer. So there's, in a number of books, we find this strange thing where you sort of get the good news first, or much of it, and then the big surprise is in book 6. For example, the very section that you just quoted from, the part I like that comes very shortly after that, and he says, my own states are in conflict with
Right.
each other. And one might at first think, oh, he's guiding us by reciting this poem. And then he says, look into yourselves and see the same warring happen between your own states. And then he points out the only escape, and he uses the word to redeem, or you may be redeemed by God, in God's unity. You see, so waharidan means literally in English we would say redeem. So there's the doctrine of redemption, but it only comes about through being delivered into the place of unity. And so the interesting thing there for me was, this is book 6. He's an older man. He knows himself very well, and he knows that these forces are still struggling within himself. And it's like in Shabbos Study. Shabbos Study at the end of his book says the same thing. And I always thought there's a very uplifting message, because all of us, we have these conflicting states. And there's the whole tradition of hyperbole in so many of the spiritual traditions. And people think, oh my goodness, I got angry, I must be very far from the path. And this is a very common malaise and problem in general in those days. Even the use of hyperbole is very ordinary, very just commonplace in anybody, Rumi included. It's just a very commonplace thing to do. But here and elsewhere, he's opening up a bit to us, and he's explaining that this conflict comes out because of the conflict of the divine names, essentially, and we are the loci for the divine names. So I love that beginning of the Masnavi and the various things, but that very passage has always been, I quote it a lot to the Afghans, because they tend we tend to be a little bit more skeptical or more questioning of hyperbolic sorts of claims and such. But in the East, very often, and not just the Afghans, it could be anybody, including, it could be a born again Christian. It doesn't have to be somebody from the East. But I just find book 6 to be so astounding, and at the end telling us, of course, that the Sufis are the laziest people in the world, because they've learned to let God do things for them. So
Yes.
it's just a wonderful resource,
Yes.
and so I can relate to that one.
And that struggle within ourselves of all the warring states and conflicts that every human being experiences is also reflected outwardly in this world at this time, when on the one hand, humanity is recognizing its common humanity, And at the same time, will unity ever be achieved, or need it be achieved on the level of appearances? Or is the fact that we are different, with different cultures, different concerns in some cases, as well as the common concerns of our humanity when facing a life and death situation like this? People are asking the question, is this moving humanity towards some new level of unity? Possibly so. At the same time, there is the false imagined unity of sameness, and then there's the unity within our diversity, within all of our differences, and seeing how even our differences work to reveal a deeper underlying unity. I think Rumi is always reminding us of that what he calls the unicolored world of peace is not in this world and never will be in this world, and yet it is accessible through our inner journey, through our inner alignment, to taste, sense, perceive that true dimension of peace, even while Cloroxing the toilets and everything else we have to do in this world.
Yeah, and also in the same sentiment, to the quiet, for some people before the storm. Like, I think for many of us, it's still the quiet before the storm, in that our economy is probably going to be hugely affected. There are things that are going to happen to the average American who has all the comforts, or has had all of the comforts that really a society could have externally. I mean, to suddenly be faced with a real, profound change that's coming, also with regard to the actual deaths and scope of this coronavirus as it grows in intensity and in size. So there's a weird feeling that I have, as I go in the dark in the morning. I leave my house at 4:40 so that I can get there at 6. And the peace of it, at the same time, in that peace and silence, realizing that I carry worry, I carry concern, I carry anger about what the authorities have not done that they should have done. And you see what I mean? So there are these feelings that, and then I remember Rumi's line, I think it's in book 3, where he says, Ashaqan andar Adam Haima Zadand. The lovers, they have made their tent in the land of Adam, of non-being. Yes. Same message, really, as we were just looking at, where Rumi says, well, there's only one place where there's no conflict, and that is a place that is outside of opposites, outside of the opposites of the divine names, actually. But certainly he puts it in that framework, and in several places in the Masnavi, he uses the very same language about all of this having to do with multiplicity and number, and versus the unity of the transcendental unity, shall we call it. Yes. And at this level, I think really the invitation is to say, well, this is not non-unity. This is unity, the way that it really is, like the unity in the ocean, where there are creatures eating each other. There's beautiful things. There's terrifying things. There's the calm ocean. There's hurricanes, and all of this is one thing.
Yes.
And the great teachers, Rumi, Hafez, and others, they try to emphasize that people understand that if God didn't create us because and at the same time want us to remain concealed. He said, I was a hidden treasure, and I wanted to be known. And the only way one can be known is to bring forth into manifestation all of these astounding elements of multiplicity and opposites and infinity and all so forth. That's what I usually call the infinity project. You know, he brings us about, and 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 so even in these times, to, I guess what I mean, let's say we were in the domain of psychotherapy, and I'm speaking to my friends who are not really following a spiritual path, but they often are people who are involved with what we would call varieties of self-actualization or psychotherapy, etc. Is that it's okay. It's okay to be scared. It's okay to be outraged. Why would one not be outraged by the ventilators not getting where they're supposed to go in time? What kind of person would think that that's just part of the way of things? Yes, it's part of the way of things, and yet my actions are also part of the way of things. I could do something, you know,
Yes.
and so again, coming back to the idea of taqwa might also involve challenge and for the sake of protecting others or protecting what is right and what is true. Because what I also see happening is, I really think this, coming more to the negative side, since we've decided to talk about that, I think we're going to see the strengthening of dictatorships as well during this time. And I think it's going to be easier for them to exercise their control, because they'll be able to use this plague, quote
Yes.
unquote, as a reason why there has to be their version of social order.
Yes.
And
Yes.
already we see our own elections being hijacked by our current president finding a platform every day to sort of do, you know, his rallies that he would normally do when he's on the road. And so, and he makes lots of mistakes, and he says a lot of stupid things, but he gets a huge amount of airtime.
Yes.
And I see that, and I think many people see that as a misuse of that office during these times, which should be really about the people of the United States and the effect of the impact that this illness is having on so many people, and the impact that it's having on the economy.
Yes.
So it strikes me that I don't know if I'm right, but I feel like it's, for us, for me anyway, and many people I know, it's like the calm of the storm. We find out there's a hurricane coming. Is it really coming? We're out on the beach, we're looking out there, and we say, no, we know, we found out Puerto Rico got destroyed, but is it coming to us, you see? And we know it is to a certain extent, but not like what we're seeing in these other places thus far, like Italy. You know, we're seeing the bodies going up. We're starting to see it in New York and elsewhere, but it is still at a low level compared to what the scientists are telling us.
Yes, it remains to be seen. And may we be prepared and awake and remain awake during this. When you were talking before about how the lovers find Rumi says the lovers pitch their tent in non-existence.
Yeah.
A beautiful image. Here we are in existence, and we must always remember that to be passive or silent in the face of injustice is to be unjust, is to collude with injustice.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly.
So
Yeah.
this another beauty of this challenge is that awakens qualities that would not otherwise be awakened, and we're in a furnace of divine qualities, and we are, for every human being that awakens and finds a little more courage, a little more generosity, a little more compassion in themselves, then the universe is having, in a sense, the manifest universe is manifesting more of those qualities. May it be so. May we be able to use these events for the benefit and development and awakening of our souls and these soul qualities, and be thankful for the possibility of doing that, and be thankful too for the comfort that comes from having a tent pitched in non-existence. You know, Rumi also says, we have the interest without the capital. Remember that one?
Yeah.
You know, that, and at this time when, of course, stock markets have been crashing, and the material things we may have depended on and the investments and so forth seem to be diminished, that for people who are focused on the spiritual reality, they have the interest, even without the capital.
Yes.
They have the blessing of the blessing that is always pouring down infinitely from our source. Amin, amin, amin.
Yes. Oh, man. The second line in that the one we're discussing about non-being, and he says chun adam yek rango nafse wahidand. So he says, and can be taken two ways, because he says, like non-being, they are unicolored. They're of one color, and they are of unified nafs. Now, that since he starts it out as Ashrakan, we could either translate it as the lovers themselves. They become, like we say even in English in love stories, about it's two souls and one body, let's say.
Yes.
On the other hand, if he says chun adam yek rango nafse wahidan, this is very interesting. He says, so like non-being, they are of one color and of unified soul. And but again, since one of the commentaries I saw, kind of along the lines of Kausar, the meaning of Kausar, that it is the source of multiplicity because of kasr, huh? So it's kasrat. The whole idea that at the same time that one is becoming sabqatullahi, the color of God, that one is also unifying these qualities in oneself, meaning at these levels that we're talking about now. Both the reason to do the zikr is that we feel God's presence in ourselves. So even in our rage, our fear, such, we say, yes, this is your chariot. We are your chariot and your horses, and you are riding us into this world. This is an old image, I'm sure, you know, again, going back to the Bhagavad Gita in these days, where the Lord of the universe, Rumi uses the same imagery, where he talks about the senses and how the senses are really that as long as you go with that sense where God is the rider of the horse, which is you as that sense. So that this beautiful idea that it's a time to cultivate the idea of service and taqwa, that it could also mean just telling the truth and being willing to tell it rather than just think it. You know? So it means possibly in these times having to become, I'm not usually a very political person, but I have become more political all of a sudden, in the sense of actually wanting to reply to things and to jump in to situations and express my outrage and concern, because I'm just flabbergasted and just shocked. And at the same time, I'm doing a lot more zikr. So I have, on the one hand, I feel very full of awe and profound oneness, and at the same time, I feel these things, as you say, to say nothing would be to be a liar, basically, in this case, or to create an injustice.
And referring to that line about the unity of the nafs brings us to a subject really important to me that I had wanted to reflect on, and you brought us there. I didn't have to bring it up, but it's the subject of our own, the coherence of souls, and how important that is in these times, and how our spiritual practice and our spiritual journey is leading us to that coherence that develops around a strong heart when we are willing to engage in the very real challenges that this earthly life presents us with, and that in meeting those challenges, in speaking truth in a time when lies seem to prevail, in attempting to enter into this sort of convoluted, entangled area of political life. Nevertheless, if spiritual people don't enter into that realm, the truth will not be heard. So it places a huge responsibility on us to be in the right state in ourselves, in a state of coherence, in a state of alignment with divine reality, in order to be fearless enough and bold enough and not be caught in a Hamlet complex of to be or not to be or not to be.
Yeah.
I was reflecting on this too, on how it's bringing forth action. It's causing, even in small ways, things that I would have retired from. For instance, we're doing more Zoom events we're starting to do some Zoom events with our wider community. And in a way, I didn't myself want to do this, but there was a need that brought this forth, and I felt compelled to act. I felt compelled also to reach out to you and have this conversation. So it's insofar as these circumstances are bringing us into action, and that action has to be in alignment with the highest truth we know. That's another side of the blessing of it. And it's the divine manifestation revealing itself through all these circumstances.
The interesting effect also of this is, you recall how small our Hanukkah is. It's literally a house, and we meet in a room. And about a month or so ago, I had emailed everyone, or had Abdurrahim email everyone on my behalf, to say that when we arrive at the house, we will only touch our hearts as a way of greeting, and we'll sit. We will not share food. We will not be up too close to each other, etc. Then 2 weeks later, actually 3 weeks later, because there was other things in the middle, that would have been last Sunday, we were going to start the new process. So the new process was, of the places we can still go, there's a place that we call Tapai Murad, which means the hill of desires granted. A place that's very lovely. It's over at Chabot Lake up in that area. And all the places that hadn't been closed down, there was this one place we go to, Tapai Murad, that is still open. And we actually we hope to go there Sunday. So basically what I wrote to everyone is we are now going to do a new spiritual practice, and we're going to do the Walking Zickuhr. Now, the Walking Zickuhr could actually be a particular Naqshbandi Zikr that I've taught to people. Or I said, just walk up and silently walk and just say whatever you're used to saying, whatever you wish to say, or Ya Hafiz, Ya Muhaimin, and keep a minimum of 10 to 12 feet from each other. You don't need to walk in single file, but we're walking up, and the whole thing from beginning to end is silent. And people wrote, say, well, can we bring food? And said, yes, you can bring food in little packages that we put on a special tarp, and people just grab their food and they take it, but there's no conversation. So I've actually changed. I've had to think about what would be in these times, because despite I'm also using Zoom more, actually I'm using other platforms a little bit more like Skype, but I still feel that if it can be done safely, I want to be that physical, even though it's at some distance, connection, and also that keeps people motivated. Because as you know, if somebody does not have a lot of experience on the path, they're still trying to root it, trying to plant it and see that grow, and it's hazardous if they suddenly go a year or something and they don't have what they count upon.
Absolutely.
So the Tapa Murad has several places where you can go off the trail, and there's little meadows where therefore people can bring mats, and where we can also do a sitting zikr. But again, always at these distances apart. Nobody who's coughing or sneezing if somebody does it. So this is a new wazifa. You take full responsibility. If you know you're about to sneeze, you get up and you walk away, and you sneeze, and you stay over there for whatever time it takes. Meaning you may not have coronavirus, but the point is you. So I said this could be really a good practice where we have these conditions, and we absolutely meticulously consider them part of the practice itself. And I don't know if you're aware of what happened when Naqshband, they were there during one of the plagues. I don't know if you're aware of the stories about that time. You were mentioning what happened in Turkey. Well, what happened is they became very hygienic. And what happened is they boiled the clothing. They insisted on absolutely meticulous cleanliness, and they this is documented that they realized that how they realized that, I have no idea. It's not explained, but they just say because of insight they realized this was the thing, is to be very, very hygienic, and they followed very strict rules about congregating, and just it reminded me a little bit of what's happening now, but from totally another time. And it made me think of, okay, well, what am I going to do now? And what, some people say, oh no, that's too scary, or what happens if the officials come? And I said, well, if the officials come, then you're like beads on a string, and you just put more space. So then suddenly there'll be 5 at a time, and they'll be 30 feet apart, and then the next 5, and those 5, of course, they're still 10 to 12 feet apart from each other, but we go into a different formation, you might say, and we do it automatically. We just see somebody's concerned, we immediately go into this other formation, and we learn this new wazifa of how we're going to do the zikr together. Some people say, well, I didn't learn the walking zikr. I said, well, you can learn it, but it's not that important, really. Walking zikr is just remembering God, and you're walking, So if you want the exact details, we can always do that. But we don't want to have time for questions and talking or anything during this silent. it's going to be specifically a silent walking zikr. And
Beautiful.
plus it's physical exercise. And if you're back out here sometime, we'll go up there, hopefully in better times, but at any time, and you'll see this is an amazing place. And I discovered when I was doing the teaching, there's I'd say it was 8 years ago, that I was getting tired by sitting too long because it's a whole day for me. I get there early in the morning. We do the zikr. I have to do sobat. I have to meet with people just endlessly. And I realized if I took off at noon and I said, I'm going to find a place nearby. And I just drove. I drove up to follow this road up the hill. And I got up the hill and I saw this trail and I parked and I went up there. And it was fantastic. And I noticed that when I said prayers there, they were being responded to. And so that's why I called it Tapai Delha. Delha means heart's desire, and or Tapai Murad, and that's what we all know it as now, is this spot.
Beautiful.
And
Beautiful.
so it's an example of what you were talking about. Like, well, what do we do to now? What should we do? That is there a way that we could meet? Yes, one of them is by Zoom and Skype and so forth. But for those of us who have communities nearby, as many of us who teach, we have communities nearby, and thinking about them and their needs and what helps them to stay focused. One of them is the discipline of the tariqah, or
Yes.
you see. So
thank you for sharing that. I too have been thinking about a zikr walk through Cherokee Park, which is a few blocks from here, a large, beautiful park that was designed by Frederick Law Olmsted, and now I have some, I think, more fullness to that idea. So,
well, it's wonderful as long as they let you. As long as they let you. I don't know how it is for you where you are. Are you allowed to be in
a lot of people are out in the park. It's actually a very beautiful time in Cherokee Park. And even though there's kind of a lockdown here in Louisville, it's not an official lockdown, but in fact, people are doing it voluntarily. And the park is one place where people go, but people keep their distance from each other. But I've never seen so many people walking this 2-mile circuit approximately, and just enjoying these. Spring is coming. Thank God, it's a beautiful time that the blossoms are on the trees, and it's a blessed time here in Kentucky. So yeah. Well, thank you, dear brother. I'm going to end this not because we wouldn't love to go on and on, but should we share?
We all have things to do, and that's very.
And should we share this with others? I would like them to feel it's an approachable quantity of this sohbet, and not to drown them in endless sohbet.
Yeah, well,
we will continue, inshallah.
Thank you again, and so nice to see you. May God keep you in good health and spirits, and I look forward to chatting with you in the near future.
Thank you so much, Bob. It's really good to be together today.
Okay, Khuda Hafiz.
Khuda Hafiz.